Okay. Well, good evening, graduate UNSY and research students. First, for everyone's awareness, we are recording this session, so a copy is going to be made available for those who are unable to attend live. Next, for the format of tonight's meeting, I'm going to start by introducing our guest, who will describe his connection to unmanned and uncrewed system technology, specifically UAS and advanced air mobility planning. After, I will lead a series of introductory questions, which we will then open up to a class-wide Q&A session. I do ask that you mute your mics, save all questions to the end, and that you use the hand raise icon to indicate when you do have a question. I will call on each of you in order. I also want to note that I'm capturing and sharing online links to important concepts, details, and tools that might be brought up in our discussion tonight. If I record any, I'll send those out in an email announcement along with a recording of this message. So with that, I am extremely excited to welcome you to the 21st session of the UNSY Guest SME Speaker Series, the third of the term for this term. I'm Dr. Brent Terwilliger, the program coordinator for the Master of Science in Unmanned Systems degree. And tonight we are joined by our guest subject matter expert, Jacque Coloun. Jacque has had the pleasure of working with the city of Orlando since 2015. He currently leads the city's efforts on preparing for advanced air mobility and emerging transportation technologies, and works on a variety of transportation planning efforts, including the city's planned Lake Highland Alden Road realignment project and Edgewater Drive complete street project. In his current role with the city's transportation department, Jacque also serves as the primary interface and reviewer on transportation-focused issues and items for all major proposed developments within the city. Jacque is a proud graduate of the University of Central Florida, where he earned a bachelor's degree in public administration and a master's degree in urban and regional planning. With that, I'm going to turn the stage over to Jacque to tell us about the city of Orlando, as well as his experience and observations associated with this rapidly changing technology.
Thank you. So first off, thank you for inviting me over this evening. Definitely happy to share what kind of my journey has been with unmanned aircraft systems and, really how the city of Orlando has been approaching this. So, I know you gave a quick background, so I'll dive into that a little bit more just to give everybody that's listening a little context. And I think, from in terms of where I'm coming from and how the city of Orlando has been approaching this. So as you heard, my background is much more in city planning. Like most cities, the city of Orlando, and same with counties, we don't have a lot of history or knowledge with aviation. We have within the city of Orlando, we do have two general aviation airports. We have the Orlando Executive Airport and Orlando International. They kind of do their own thing. They have their own professionals, their own planning staff that deal with that. But with UAS, with all of these types of aircraft, one of the big sells or big possible benefits with this is the ability to take a lot of these traditional aviation activities off the airport and bring them closer to where some of those needs are in terms of whether it's passenger, cargo, medical, emergency response, whatever it might be. It really moves a lot of these operations off of the airport, not just flight paths, but also the takeoff and landing aspects of it. So a lot of planners like myself that have typically been dealing more with what a lot of people would probably think of more traditional city planning, where should this building go? Where should this type of development look like? Those types of things, all really very much based on the ground, and not we haven't had to really get into understanding airspace and aviation integration. So it's been very different for me the past couple of years. For the city, so my current role is kind of all different kinds of transportation. We work on autonomous ground-based vehicles. We're working with a company called Lilium that's looking to put a vertiport into Lake Nona for their new eVTOL aircraft. I'm assuming on some of these things that if there's any acronyms, I think you all probably know more acronyms than I do in terms of this. But if there's any that you want me to, kind of go through and just let you know what they are, let me know. But like, I think you guys are pretty good. So with these new eVTOL aircraft, also deal with, and we have to continue to look at traditional ways of transportation for both cargo and passengers. So buses, cars, trucks, trains, those aren't going anywhere. So for the city of Orlando, Mayor Dyer is very keen on looking forward. And so he tasked us with coming up with, well, really understanding what is advanced air mobility. For us, that really was our first focus, was the AAM side of it, so passenger aircraft. So what is advanced air mobility, and what is that going to mean for the city? A lot of people like to use the kind of correlate it to, I don't know if anybody in this group listening has had experience where all of a sudden, wherever you're living, there were 20, 30 scooters in front of your building that just kind of popped up. And we learned a lot of lessons from that. Luckily, once you're talking about aircraft, it takes a lot longer for them to they're not going to just show up. So we have a little longer lead time to kind of think through this. And for the city, it's how do we, if this is going to come, how do we integrate it into our transportation network? So that means for passengers, that's, where do they take off? Where do they land? How do they get to the vertiport? How do we ensure kind of that seamless passenger experience? Because if this is going to work for passengers, it has to be, fairly seamless. So you're not trying to get from because these aircraft won't be taking off and landing at your house unless you're very rich and have a very large house with a vertiport. So you have to get to the vertiport. And then on the other end, you have to get from the vertiport to your final location. So from the transportation side, that integration of the passenger experience as well as the trips is really important to us. And then from the cargo side, we see this as possibly, one of the things that we do for every large scale new development is we do what's called a traffic impact analysis. And so what that does is it looks at the development, how many trips is this development going to create, and what are those attractors that these trips are going to go to or come from as part of the development. Well, aircraft are completely different when you're looking at those types of systems and trying to understand the impacts at the ground level of aircraft. If you have cargo delivery via drone or larger eVTOL, the impact on the ground is going to be very different than if it was all based on vehicles, ground-based vehicles. Because with ground-based vehicles, you basically have the same amount coming into the site as out of the site on our city roadways. When you're talking about aircraft, you might have a lot coming in via roadway, and then a lot of the trips, deliveries maybe are done via drone or other aircraft. And that completely changes how we plan for improvements around these types of facilities. So there's a lot of different potential impacts that we have to look at. And one of the first things, and I'm going to share my screen real quick. So I don't know how familiar everybody is with planning. I'm going to give you a really, really quick planning 101. Let's see if I can, let me go here. So if you look at this map here, this is Orange County. And don't worry if you can't read a lot of stuff. We'll zoom in a minute, but this is Orange County. And when you look at Orange County, there are a number of different municipalities. So since I work for the city of Orlando, all I deal with is kind of what you see in this beigeish color here is city of Orlando. When you look at, unlike a lot of places up north where you got, a lot of very nice square lines for cities and towns, in Florida, this is pretty typical where you've got your jurisdictional boundaries are all over the place. And for us, we can only regulate what happens within our jurisdiction. So this is a really good example. Let's say you have from this location here where you see this little fire truck, if there's a flight taking off from this location and going across these lakes, going over, let's say over to this Oak Ridge High, you're starting in Orange County, you go over the city of Orlando, then back to Orange County, then through the city of Belle Isle, then maybe through the city of Edgewood back to Orange County. So you're going in the span of just a few miles, you're going through at least 4, maybe 5 jurisdictions. And every jurisdiction may have different rules for what happens on the ground. For what happens in the air with AAM, that's something that there's a lot of discussion about, and I'll get to that shortly, but each of these locations on the ground have what's called a different zoning. So let's see. So for zoning, you'll see there's a lot of like R1s, IP, C3, A2. So each of these codes means something different in every jurisdiction. Don't worry too much about it. This area here in the city of Orlando is zoned IG, which is an industrial park. And what that IG allows is pretty much every city, county, every jurisdiction has zoning and then zoning tables similar to this that show what types of uses are allowed. So we have, I can't say we were forward thinking, our vertiports in a code, we have something called vertiports. What we have in code that refers to vertiports, while it's a very broad definition that could include drones, it's basically anything with rotorcraft or rotors and that flies. That is a very broad definition, but when that was first put into place back in the, I believe, 60s, technology was very different. And so IG does allow for vertiports. So under our current code, you could put a vertiport in this zoning that allows for both drones to take off and land. We're not, let's ignore adjacent airports for a moment. That allows aircraft to take off and land. And we have certain requirements for vertiports in our city code. But as I mentioned, this code does not wasn't made or created and crafted with the understanding of how these aircraft are going to operate now. So one big thing that the city of Orlando is doing is looking at these policies, and this is what's in city code. This is what we have to hold ourselves and developers to, or both public and private entities to, if they want to do anything at the ground level in the city. So we need to look at this and really understand what is different about advanced air mobility. What is different about these new types of cargo hubs, whether it's an Amazon, Walmart, or even just, I was down in Miami earlier this year, and at a conference, the taco shop, it was very much based on autonomous vehicles, but the taco shop 2 blocks away delivered lunch to people via drone. So it could be something really big or something really small. And we have to understand what are those impacts at the ground level. And there's so many pages in this, but our code, and that's really what it comes down to for local jurisdictions, is what is happening at the ground. For me, one of my main concerns is the transportation aspect of things, but I have others within City Hall with me that are very interested and really need to understand what is the potential impact to the neighbors from these types of activities. If we have, I don't know if any of you have ever been to International Drive in Orlando, but a lot of tourist districts have this as well, where there are helicopters that will take you on a tour. I'm not sure what they're looking at in Orlando. I think they try to get as close to Disney as they're allowed, but you know, that having two aircraft take off, you know, do their tour and land is very different than what we've seen with something like this from Lilium. So this is Tavistock. This is their really rough illustration of what they think a Lilium vertiport in Tavistock could look like. So you've got this, I believe, has 7 different locations for jets to pull in. It is, I mean, it is an airport, but the size of this airport is very different than, you know, all the other airports that we have in our area. And this also is very different than our traditional vertiport heliport, where you have 2, 3 helicopters that are all based there. You know, you're not getting more than 3 helicopters at, you know, any time, because they just take off and land from that same location. Something like this, where, you know, they want to have, here we go, they want to be able to get to other cities throughout the state of Florida. They're going to have, you know, a number of aircraft that are not just based there, but coming in and out throughout every hour of the day. So the number of operations is very different, and the impacts of these operations could be very different than that of a traditional heliport. And one of the big things that we are working out, and hopefully, you know, it sounds like some folks on this call listening in might be engaged in research. Some of the big things that cities and really the whole industry is looking for in terms of research are, you know, are some of the who's responsible for what portions of these types of operations. We have a very, very built out network of towers and procedures for manned aircraft, whether that is visual line of sight or using instrumentation. There's a lot of policies, procedures in place for that. But there are only so many of those aircraft in flight at any given time. With the number of aircraft, both passenger and cargo, that they're thinking about coming online in the next, you know, 5, 10, 15 years, it's not going to be sustainable to have the same type of network and same type of policies and way air traffic management. And I know that we have had several companies try to sell to the city of Orlando a UTM, you know, an aircraft management system just for drones and autonomous AAM. The city of Orlando, we're not in the business of regulating aircraft operations, but is that something that will be able to happen at the FAA level, a state level, or is there a role for local government in those operations, data sharing? All of that is a big missing, it's a big piece of discussion and a big piece of research that we've been partially engaged with, but I know that's something that we're looking for more information on. And conversations I've had with FDOT and FAA, there's also, and with NASA, there's a lot of desire to figure out how will this work. There's
if I could jump in just on that piece. In class, I'm going to share with you In my update tomorrow, you'll all get a message that connects to the NASA ConOps for urban air mobility, which was kind of the predecessor of where we're at. That was assembled by Deloitte with NASA and the FAA, and then they brought a bunch of industry SMEs together. I was able to help support that in Virginia and LA in 2019, 2020 timeframe. It's leading to very much what Jacque is describing here, where we have to start looking at public private partnerships, different working agreements to establish the infrastructure, because conventional aviation infrastructure, it's a thought, it's a starting point for how we can envision this, but it is very much not flexible in the way that multimodal transportation and advanced urban environments require. We see this technology just changing so rapidly. I mean, look at eVTOLs. The questions are being asked, okay, how do we ensure sufficient power is available on site? Whose responsibility is that? Is it, in your guys' case, OUC? Is it FPL? Is it Duke? Or is it a combination of the three? How do we ensure commonality, consistency? If we have, you know, the Lilium group is landing at other vertiports, and that's where that vertiport standard also becomes an essential piece. The FAA just released their first pass at that. I'll put a link to that as well. The great thing about this is one of those cases where we have so many stakeholders coming to the party. They're all bringing great ideas. They're all pushing innovation. And we are just seeing just such a rich tapestry of concepts, of ideas, of opportunity. And I mean, this is one of those things that I look at this and I really think of the Walt Disney notion of it's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. I mean, we have just so much ahead of us that we can engage on. It's our generation's moonshot. We are engaging on the technology that is going to radically transform things. So sorry if I kind of interrupted you.
No, please, anytime.
I knew there was a connection there that I wanted to make sure that the students took away, and when they see it tomorrow, they'll understand it.
And I don't know if, and the ConOps that Eve Air Mobility, which is an offshoot from Embry-Riddle, they've done a number of ConOps out of, you know, looking at Miami-Dade, how to get from the airport to the convention center. What would that look like in an eVTOL? So there's a number of, you know, as you mentioned, there's a lot of groups out there coming to the table. And this is one where I truly feel that the goal is to get this right for both public sector and private sector. Unlike if you get something wrong with a scooter, somebody might break an ankle, get hurt. If you get something wrong with an aircraft, once it's bigger than, you know, a small drone, it's not a good look for anybody. And so really trying to get it right from the start. And one of the, let's see, and so a lot of private sector have been coming to the city to understand from a city perspective, what are our needs? And that is, I find very refreshing, because we're used to people just saying, hey, this is what we're going to do, kind of get over it. So having that collaboration, and also collaboration with universities and NASA and different organizations is really, we're all learning this together to a point. There are definitely those who, I am by no means an airspace expert. You know, I know the wedding cake, I want to eat the wedding cake, but it's, you know, talking about airspace, so that's not as exciting. But there's so much change and so many new innovative opportunities out there. It's going to be a crawl, walk, run. Right now, everybody's kind of crawling, and then hopefully in the next couple of years, a walk and then a run into where you really see it a little bit more universally. But when I described to people, we had a meeting with Walmart. They were looking to bring drone delivery into the city of Orlando. And just understanding some of the federal guidelines to be able to do that, you think a drone delivery, oh, that'll be great. Well, until you realize it can only be within a couple miles. The way that they're operating, within a couple miles, there's a chase car that has to keep an eye on the drone the whole time, and it's piloted. Well, that doesn't sound nearly as fun and sexy as, oh, I just thought a drone would drop this off and leave. But that setting that groundwork, I know, is important. And for us as a city, it's what can we do to help that groundwork happen at the same time as exercising our rights as a city to regulate the land use. So one other thing I want to point out real quick is, let me share again. Let's see, share screen share. Okay, so where this vertiport for Tavistock, they're still working through the exact location of the vertiport. Get rid of these parcel lines, here we go. But what they're looking at is, so this is Orlando International Airport here. They're looking in this community here, which is Lake Nona. So they're looking at this area down here. It could be somewhere in here, somewhere back here, but it's generally fairly low density, low rise development. So there's not a lot of aerial structures in the way. There might be power lines, some communication towers, but when you look at other folks, somebody like Skyports, that is one of the, tries to be one of those more agnostic, anybody can come type of people, they're looking at an environment more like downtown Orlando, where you've got a number of high-rise buildings, you've got a lot more crowd of people. So when this stadium is full of 25,000 people, what does that mean to aircraft operations from a vertiport that's operating maybe, let's say, from the top of this parking garage? And so that's a very different question in operations than looking at a vertiport over here that's operating outside, out of the executive airport. Not something that we have typically had to think about before, but has been very important to really consider moving forward. Also, what I found really interesting is I would say most of the discussions we've had for these vertiports, unlike most of the general aviation airports, these will be pretty much purely private. So a lot of folks are not looking for FAA funding. And so therefore, the role of the state is much, much less. And one of the biggest differences that I learned, FDOT has an advanced air mobility working group. And at our last meeting, something that comes up a lot is so if somebody puts a vertiport in this parking lot per se, well, I'll pick this one, it's a little clearer. Let's say somebody puts a vertiport in this parking lot. Well, what does that mean to adjacent properties? If it is a public use airport, that airspace must be, it has to be protected. If this is a private airport, it doesn't receive that FAA funding, all of that. We don't have to, as a city, we have no need to protect the airspace that this airport needs. So if somebody wants to come in, tear down this building, put up a high rise right in the middle of the approach departure, the FADO for this, that's fine. We as a city have no obligation to accommodate that. And those are the types of things that typically didn't really get into from the city perspective before. We don't have any, we don't do, what is it? I can't think of the word. I'll think of it later at the most random time, but we don't preserve air rights. There we go, over properties. So it really becomes that vertiport operator, whoever's establishing that vertiport to really make the case to buy development rights maybe from another property, get easements, those types of things. It's on that developer rather than the city. And then the last thing I want to make sure I mention is for our role with AAM, just to really reiterate where the city is coming from, our role is primarily land use regulations. Where can you put stuff? And based off of that, the operations of the aircraft come into play, as well as if we say you can have a vertiport, but only on 15 acres, a property 15 acres or more, we're basically saying you can't be in the downtown area. If we say that your vertiport can be here, but you have to have certain types of electrical connections, certain types of vehicle connections, emergency landing operations, those types of things, that is something that is in our rights and really our police powers. But once it gets up in the air, it really comes out of the city's purview. And so finding that out for me and really kind of going through that whole process has been really enlightening. But really the impact of these operations are going to be felt at the local level. Once these aircraft, and particularly the smaller the aircraft, once they're in the air and kind of on their way between sites, it's not going to have a lot of impact on the ground, particularly with the electric aircraft, but the takeoff, the landing, and how that vertiport or warehouse, how those operations integrate into the community really is where we as the local jurisdictions were really concerned how that's gonna happen. I think that was most of what I wanted to talk about. Let's see, UC Berkeley, and just to really let you guys know, folks from all the way from the ICAO, from ICAO all the way down to cities are looking at this and trying to understand who regulates what, where do we fit in, and what do we need to do? What are the enabling technologies or enabling understandings to move things forward? I definitely appreciate, I guess I'll call you Brent because I don't know you, but I appreciate the comment you made about electrification and really the need for agnostic infrastructure is something we are really, if we can push for as a city, is something that we want to see, because we also don't want every aircraft operator to have their own vertiport. If there's a way to have folks come together within one vertiport, maybe 3-4 different aircraft providers or operators, that's much better than having 20 vertiports. And honestly, it doesn't make sense for every vertiport operator to have their own. Not for a while, there's probably not going to be enough folks coming in. On the drone side, maybe, because the operations are probably a lot smaller in investment, but still, we want as much agnostic infrastructure as we can. So with that, I'm gonna, I guess, open it up for questions, or Brent, if you have any other questions or anything you want me to kind of cover from the city side, let me know.
Absolutely. And that was so informative. You know, we approach this so often from the FAA federal side.
Mhm.
So to get a peek into how local and municipal governments are looking at investing and developing and you know, really advancing their role in the stakeholder side of this is so critical. It's something that it's usually that much more difficult for us to kind of get that introduction to. So it's amazing to hear that first person perspective on this.
One real quick, one thing that people, in terms of the local level, one unintended consequence, a lot of cities are really trying to increase their tree canopy. If you have a great tree canopy, though, what does that mean for your Amazon delivery? And so it's something as simple as, hey, we need to have something in our code that says you can't cut down your tree just to get Amazon package delivery, because there's the greenhouse gases, there's heat island effect, there's a lot of things. And those are some of the things that just, you're like, wait, oh, that could happen. Okay, let's think about this a little bit more on the local level.
I got your solution. You deliver it to public parks, because public parks always have a large opening at some point, and many, not always, but many folks live in closer proximity to a park than they do to the Best Buy, the Walmart, the Target, wherever it is that they're trying to go to. So it's something I've actually been discussing with some of my colleagues, is how do we get to, we can't get to last mile right to your house at the moment. What's the next best step with UAS delivery? And it's like, well, I don't know about you, but I have parks. I have like 5 parks. I live in the city of Sanford. We are on a grid system. We have open air access at key critical spots that, hey, for me, I can jump on a golf cart and I can get to that spot much easier than it would be for me to go to Target or the big box store. So I'd be helping to contribute, and also still be able to achieve that progress towards what the big stores want to get to.
And something like that from the city side also, one of our goals, one of the benefits we see of UAS delivery is really reducing the number of vehicle trips on a lot of our roads. So instead of going 10 miles to Target, if you're going 2 miles to a park or pickup location, that's 8 miles less wear and tear, congestion on the roadway. So that is one of the big benefits we see from this, is that reduction in trips.
So can I ask, what tools or resources do you personally use to stay informed of the latest and greatest technological advancements? And what are some of the challenges that you find of just sifting through the large volume of information that's out there in the public space?
Well, so a couple of the key things, as a general standpoint, I use a Google alert. Just every morning I get a Google alert and it shoots me, hey, these are the things that have happened. These are the major announcements with AAM. I also get a lot of information. Have to take it with a grain of salt, but AUVSI. I subscribe to information that they put out. They are, and speaking again to that partnership standpoint, they just released a couple days ago their policy toolkit of how they want to see policies change in states to accommodate UAS. So on their website, they just announced proposed legislation and a couple different things. But again, it's very much from their, they are a policy group that's for their members. Really, it's for the city. It took me a little while, but knowing what's important to me and to us as a jurisdiction. I think it's all super cool and awesome, but I don't need to know the interoperability of communication systems between drones and maybe the existing aircraft monitoring system. That is not my role. And so really looking through what is my focus. And that has been hard for me because all of it's so fun, but ultimately my focus really needs to be on what are the impacts to the city of Orlando? What are the things that we have control over? Things like safety. The cities, municipalities should not be in the business of certifying any aircraft or talking of really getting into safety. So that is a big thing. Also, as you mentioned, NASA has been doing some work. They have an annex about UAS and AAM integration. We're working with them on doing a use case, really mapping out from start to finish, what would an emergency operation flight plan look like? So partnering with NASA, partnering with our local hospitals, looking at that through every step. Also, really, I rely a lot on the network that I've been able to build the past couple of years. CAMI, the Community Air Mobility Integration folks, have a lot of great information. They are focused more so on advanced air mobility and passenger vehicle. But the more we look at this, the end goal for advanced air mobility for most companies is autonomy. That's really where they are able to get the bigger revenue from their trips. You don't have to pay a pilot. Great. That's one person, that's a huge cost, and it's another seat we can sell. So there is a lot of information from AAM that is transferable over to UAS, because that's the goal ultimately, is to have it all be autonomous. And then just so many conferences, too many conferences.
Well, on the AUVSI side, if I can ever help with that, I'm on their board of directors here for the Florida Peninsula chapter.
Okay.
And I can tell you, we are always looking to build relationships and just information exchange, understanding, where the different stakeholders are at, what's important to them, helping to facilitate that. Because, I'm on the university side of things. So we're very much concerned with this, helping to connect students to the latest topics and understand where the opportunities are.
I was just going to say real quick, one of the big things that came up in terms of drones is there's always, more so with drones, is that fight between privacy and use of the airspace. And I've been in a couple very interesting discussions with the legal staff from like CNN and ABC and those types of folks, which have a very different viewpoint than many cities. So it's the coming together sometimes is easier than other times.
Understood. What are some of the pressing technological problems that you're seeing right now in UAS or advanced air mobility that really needs some focus from maybe research and development, student project planning? What are some of the things that our students can be looking at to bolster their background in something?
Yeah, so one of the big ones is, how do we deal with data? And the one group that's working on this is the Open Mobility Foundation, which did a lot of work on data for scooters. And I think scooters are a great example of this, because as you all know, Florida might get hurricanes every now and then. And one of the city of Orlando's requirements, we don't need to know where every scooter is just for the heck of it. Prior to the storms coming in, we had to make sure that every scooter was off city streets and out of the way, so that if something were to happen, emergency services could get by, and it's not just a pile of scooters in the street. So we were able to have that requirement for we have 5 different scooter providers to share their data, because there was a data standard that had been published, that had been worked on by the Open Mobility Foundation in coordination with universities, universities, cities, and industry. And for advanced air mobility, the type of data that we would be looking for is different. But how do we, as a local city, get that data? What type of standards are there? Protecting privacy is a really important one. But if you have certain types of cargo going over our city, we'd really like to know if there's an incident and our fire department has to respond. Do they need to know that there's a hazardous material there? Do they need to know that there were 12 passengers and they get there, there's only 10? These are some really important things. How that data gets captured, shared is really important. Also, just generally, and I know there's a lot of discussion on this, but how is everything talking to each other is something that there's still a lot of discussion on. I know at the ICAO conference, the RPAS conference I was at last month, there was a lot of discussion on those types of topics, but it's still just a lot of discussion, and there's not a lot of answers from what I've seen. And I don't know, do you guys deal a lot with, one of the big questions is how do we make these types of technologies, how do we either demonstrate or how do we do that community outreach? And with this new type of technology, and that has been a really big question, is what are novel and new ways to demonstrate this technology, maybe without having the technology available? Because so many of these aircraft, drone all the way up through AAM, are still in production and design, and they are not, if they have something going through certification, they're not willing to just, let's just ship it over to Orlando to show it off. So how are we able to engage with the public? Because unlike traditional airports, where for the most part, there's an airport there, people will still complain about noise, but it's not a surprise if you see an aircraft. These new vertiports are going to be much more in local jurisdictions, in neighborhoods, in cities. It's a whole different type of communication process.
I can make a recommendation of one place to consider starting, and that's the Transportation Research Board, TRB. They have the Airport Cooperative Research Program, ACRP. A couple of years ago, we were looking at just the UAS engagement and outreach piece with stakeholders, with groups like there's the Airport Management Committee. They have some results from that, and I know they have some ongoing outreach and engagement projects that they're trying to do exactly, I think, as you're describing, is how do we connect? We had some local stakeholders. I don't know if you know Finn Bonsett with VHB or not. So Finn's a great guy that can connect you up.
Finn knows everybody. So
he's been one of our guests on here talking about advanced air mobility. So there's some different folks in the aviation community, but you're exactly on target when you mention that this isn't like UAS exactly. It's not like conventional aviation. It's not like helicopters, which is what we're using that as our foundation. But we do know there's substantive change that's going to occur from this. So I think we're trying to intentionally think of the differences up front so that we can introduce a more diverse opportunity with this, a more engaged, a more connected group of users than we may have with typical rotary wing helicopter. So but yeah, that would be a great place. I'm going to open up to our students. I see Brad put something into the meeting chat. I'm going to read that, and then if any of you else have questions, please raise your hand. I'll call on you, and we will go. So Brad's is, what do the constituents of Orlando think about vertiports or unmanned systems? Overall acceptance or standoff?
So the constituents of Orlando, really, that's still a question to be determined. We have not done a lot of general community outreach. We have done a lot of outreach with our industry partners, our local aviation authority, Lynx, our local bus provider, our different counties, cities in the area, but we have not gone out to the broader public yet. And so that's definitely going to be a question. Some of the original feedback we got when we first announced the going through the planning process was, well, we have a housing crisis. Why are we spending money on flying cars or getting people who are too lazy to drive to Walmart to pick up their package? Why are we spending money on that? And the answer is, for a lot of these types of activities, we have to spend the money to plan for them, to see, is this something that we want to welcome into our community or not? We have every right within our zoning codes to say, no, we don't want to expand uses to allow these, or we want to be, yes, we want to allow them in very specific places. So we need to research and understand that before it happens, or before we make those decisions. And then even more so, it's coming. The amount of funding that is being put into research development, there's no way that much money is not going to result in something coming. What exactly it is, how quick it comes, I think some people might have an overly optimistic or pessimistic, depending on which end of the spectrum. This is not going to be in 2025. There's thousands of these things coming in and out of Orlando. There's just no way for production to ramp up that much. But it is going to come. And so our mayor really wants to make sure that we plan ahead for it. I'm very interested to see, Brad, what is that acceptance? We definitely think there'll be a couple, and that depends on how you present it. In the case of drones, a UAS, so smaller UAS, there are a couple use cases that I think are very make a lot of sense, and I think will have broad acceptance. If you need to get, let's say, something like a Venom bike kit to somebody, and you use a drone to do it, I don't think there's probably not going to be a lot of people who really don't, who would be like, oh no, that's too noisy, let them take a car. It's a different story if you've got aircraft that are taking people from Orlando to Tampa, let's say $200 away, each way, and everybody else is stuck on I-4. So those are two very different use cases. And I think that will make a big difference on how that acceptance, how that pans out.
Bo asked, you talked about the challenges faced specifically in Orlando. Are the challenges the other founding cities in the World Economic Forum's Advanced and Urban Aerial Mobility Cities and Regions coalitions faced that much different? So in other words, what we're looking at happening here in Central Florida, are these challenges similar or unique compared to other major urban areas?
I would say both. Some of the fundamentals are definitely very similar. And a lot of it is because there are so many unknowns. We don't know how fast will a drone package, how many drones will come out of a warehouse an hour. We don't really know what that looks like at scale. We don't really know how quickly turnaround will be at a vertiport. So how many operations an hour will happen there. So a lot of those unknowns are pretty universal. Some of the big things that are some of the larger pieces that are different really come down to regulations and the regulatory environment that these different cities are in. Someplace, so Dubai, which is we'll say a little more top heavy from regulations. If they want something to happen at the top level, it will filter down very quickly and it can happen. Places like the US, Australia, a little bit, to some extent, South Korea, it's much more of, yes, there's that top, overarching framework, but a lot of these finer detailed decisions are happening at the state and local level. And so it is, depending on the regulatory framework, it is very different between the different cities. And that's something that we found is there are a lot of similarities, but having the universal kind of answer for everybody, even in the US, has been challenging. NASA and UC Berkeley have been working on a guide, basically a playbook for jurisdictions to come up with, to use to say, are we ready for UAS and AAM? Do we have policies? Do we have staff in place for this? And just having something that is universal, even within the US, it's really challenging because there's so many local aspects of this. So it's a little bit of both. A lot of the same questions and challenges, but so many differences based off of the regulatory environment.
Outstanding. Well, anybody else, any other questions or going once, going twice? Okay. Class, I want to thank you all for joining tonight, as well as a major thank you to Jacque for sharing his perspective, his thoughts, and most importantly, his time regarding this exciting technology. It's been a very informative and enlightening session that helps us to better understand the future of this field. As a reminder, I will stay on for a bit to answer any questions you might have regarding assignments or activities from this final week in UNSY 603 or ASCII 693. And to all the others who joined from graduate UNSY courses, thank you for coming out. Really do appreciate it.
So just do I have any follow-up assignments? I'm good. My homework's in.
Good. Yeah, at some point in the future, I'd definitely love to bend your ear again and see, if there's, anything we can help kind of connect you up with resources, or if I could, get your thoughts on it as we evolve our curriculum. We're always working to try to make sure we have the most up-to-date information, and we have an interesting opportunity to get stakeholder input for future changes coming up soon.
Definitely. Yeah. And I'm happy to come up to Sanford if there's beer involved, but
our area.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Jacque.
Bye.